A millionaire Arab visits an orphanage and sees a girl who looks just like his wife. Driven by the resemblance, he investigates her past, and the ending will leave you speechless. Rashid Al-Mansour stood at the entrance of the Casablanca Children's Home, his imposing figure softened by the gentle afternoon light. The renowned Arab businessman, known for his vast fortune and philanthropic endeavors, adjusted his tailored suit as he prepared to enter the building. Despite his outward appearance of success, a deep sadness lingered in his eyes, a pain that had become his constant companion over the past 5 years. As he walked through the hallways of the orphanage, Rashid's mind drifted to the tragic event that had shattered his world, the car accident that took away his beloved wife Amira and their precious daughter Layla left a void in his heart that no amount of wealth or success could fill. He had spent countless sleepless nights wondering what could have been, his dreams haunted by the laughter of his little girl and the warm smile of his wife. The sound of children playing in the courtyard brought him back to the present. Rashid had been funding various projects for vulnerable children in this orphanage, hoping to make a difference in their lives. It was his way of honoring the memory of his family and finding purpose in the wake of his loss. As he approached the main playroom, a small figure caught his attention. In the corner, away from the other children, sat a young girl of about 8 years old. She was hunched over a coloring book, her dark curls falling over her face as she concentrated on her task. Something about her solitary presence tugged at Rashid's heart. Slowly, he made his way towards her, careful not to startle the child. As he got closer, the girl looked up, and Rashid felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The resemblance was uncanny. She had the same almond-shaped eyes as Amira, and the delicate nose that had always made Layla look like a little fairy princess. "Hello there," Rashid said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "May I join you?" The girl nodded silently, her eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. As Rashid sat down beside her, he noticed the sadness in her gaze, a melancholy that seemed far too profound for someone so young. "My name is Rashid," he introduced himself, picking up a crayon. "What's your name?" "Zara," she replied, her voice barely audible. Rashid's heart skipped a beat. Zara, it meant flower in Arabic, just like Layla had meant night. He watched as the girl returned to her coloring, her small hand moving the crayon with surprising precision for her age. "That's a beautiful drawing, Zara," Rashid commented, noticing the intricate patterns she was creating. "You're very talented." A ghost of a smile flickered across Zara's face, and for a moment Rashid saw a glimpse of the joy that must have once lived there. He felt an overwhelming urge to protect this child, to uncover the story behind her sad eyes. As they sat together, coloring in comfortable silence, Rashid's mind raced with questions. The resemblance, the age, the name, could it all be mere coincidence? Or was there something more to this chance encounter? The orphanage director, Ms. Benali, approached them with a warm smile. "I see you've met our little artist," she said, her eyes twinkling with affection for Zara. Rashid stood up, his mind made up. "Ms. Benali, might I have a word with you in private?" As they walked towards her office, Rashid cast one last glance at Zara. The girl had returned to her solitary world, but something had changed. A small spark of connection had been ignited, and Rashid knew he couldn't walk away without learning more. In Ms. Benali's office, Rashid settled into a chair, his fingers drumming nervously on the armrest. "Tell me about Zahra," he said, trying to keep his voice. No identification, no family to claim her. She was in shock, barely speaking. Rashid's heart raced. 5 years ago, the same time as the accident. "And now?" he asked, leaning forward. "She's made progress, but she's still very withdrawn. Zara doesn't remember much about her past, and what little she does recall seems to frighten her." Ms. Benali paused, studying Rashid's face. "Mr. Al-Mansour, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is there a reason for your particular interest in Zara?" Rashid took a deep breath, weighing his words carefully. "Ms. Benali, I can't explain it, but I feel a connection to this child. The timing, her appearance, it's all too similar to—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Ms. Benali's eyes widened with understanding. "Your daughter," she said softly. "The one you lost in the accident?" Rashid nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I know it sounds crazy, but I need to know more. Is there any way I can look into Zara's background?" Ms. Benali hesitated. "There are procedures, Mr. Al-Mansour, and Zara's case has some complications. A social worker named Mr. Khalil has been particularly protective of her file." "I understand," Rashid said, his determination growing, "but I'm willing to go through any necessary channels. Whatever it takes." As he left the orphanage that evening, Rashid's mind was a whirlwind of emotions and possibilities. He watched as Zara was led away by a caretaker, her small hand clutching her coloring book. In that moment, he made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth about this mysterious child, no matter the obstacles. Little did Rashid know that his chance encounter with Zara was about to set in motion a series of events that would not only change his life, but also unravel a mystery that had been buried for 5 long years. As he drove away from the orphanage, the setting sun cast long shadows across the Casablanca skyline, hinting at the secrets and revelations that lay ahead in this unexpected journey of rediscovery and hope. The following weeks saw Rashid Al-Mansour becoming a frequent visitor at the Casablanca Children's Home. Each visit deepened his connection with Zara, and with every interaction, the similarities between the quiet girl and his lost daughter Layla became more apparent. It wasn't just her physical appearance, it was the way she tilted her head when curious, the gentle way she handled her crayons, and the spark in her eyes when she felt safe enough to smile. One sunny afternoon, as Rashid sat with Zara in the orphanage's small garden, he decided to broach the subject of her past. "Zahra," he began gently, "do you remember anything about your life before you came here?" The girl's hand stilled over her drawing, her eyes growing distant. For a moment, Rashid feared he had pushed too far, but then Zara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I see flashes, a red scarf in the wind, the sound of screeching tires. A man with a scar on his hand." She shuddered, and Rashid instinctively placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he soothed. "You're safe now." But inside, his mind was racing. These fragments seemed to align too closely with the circumstances of the accident that had torn his family apart. Later that day, Rashid found himself in Ms. Benali's office once again. "I need to investigate Zahra's background further," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "There's too much that doesn't add up." Ms. Benali sighed, her expression conflicted. "Mr. Al-Mansour, I understand your feelings, but there are protocols we must follow. Mr. Khalil, the social worker assigned to Zahra's case, is very protective of her file." Rashid leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Ms. Benali, I respect the rules, but I can't ignore my instincts. Is there anything you can tell me about how Zahra came to be here?" After a moment's hesitation, Ms. Benali pulled out a thin file. "All I can say is that she was found by a truck driver in a rural area, about 100 kilometers from here. She was unconscious with minor injuries. No identification, no clues about her family." Rashid's mind whirled with this new information. The location was not far from where his family's accident had occurred. "And this Mr. Khalil," he pressed, "why is he so invested in Zahra's case?" Ms. Benali shook her head. "I'm not sure. He took over the case shortly after Zahra arrived and has been particularly adamant about controlling access to her information. It's unusual." Determined to uncover the truth, Rashid decided to take matters into his own hands. He reached out to Omar, a trusted friend and skilled private investigator. "I need you to look into 2 things," Rashid explained over a secure phone line. "First, everything you can find about Zahra's arrival at the orphanage 5 years ago. And second, I need you to investigate this social worker, Mr. Khalil." As Omar began his investigation, Rashid focused on building a stronger bond with Zahra. He introduced her to art therapy, hoping it might help unlock more of her memories. During one session, as Zahra painted with watercolors, she suddenly froze, her brush hovering over the paper. "Zahra?" Rashid asked gently. "What is it?" I remember something," she said, her voice trembling. "A woman. She was singing to me." Her voice was so beautiful, but she sounded sad. Rashid's heart clenched. Amira had always sung lullabies to Layla, even on long car rides. Could it be possible? As days turned into weeks, Rashid's hope grew, but so did his frustration with the bureaucratic roadblocks. Mr. Khalil seemed to appear at every turn, questioning Rashid's involvement and creating obstacles to accessing Zahra's records. One evening, as Rashid was leaving the orphanage, he noticed a sleek black car parked across the street. The driver, a man with sharp features and cold eyes, seemed to be watching the building intently. When he saw Rashid looking his way, he quickly drove off. Unsettled, Rashid called Omar. "I think we're onto something," he said. "Someone's watching the orphanage. We need to be careful, but we also need to move faster." Omar's voice was grim on the other end. "I've found some discrepancies in Zara's file, Rashid. And this Mr. Khalil? His background doesn't check out. There's something bigger going on here." As Rashid hung up, he felt a mix of anticipation and dread. He was getting closer to the truth, but at what cost? And more importantly, what would that truth mean for Zara? The next day, Rashid arrived at the orphanage earlier than usual. As he approached the building, he saw Mr. Khalil exiting, a folder tucked suspiciously under his arm. Their eyes met, and for a moment tension crackled in the air between them. Mr. Khalil's face hardened. "Mr. Al-Mansour," he said, his voice cold, "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your involvement with Zara." Rashid straightened, meeting the man's gaze squarely. "I couldn't agree more, Mr. Khalil. In fact, I have quite a few questions for you as well." As they stood there, the morning sun casting long shadows across the pavement, Rashid knew he was on the cusp of uncovering a truth that could change everything. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but the picture they were forming was far more complex and potentially dangerous than he had ever imagined. With a deep breath, Rashid prepared himself for the confrontation that lay ahead. For Zahra's sake, and for the memory of his family, he would stop at nothing to uncover the truth that had been buried for far too long. The tension between Rashid and Mr. Khalil was palpable as they faced each other outside the orphanage. Rashid, determined to get answers, suggested they move their conversation to a more private setting. Reluctantly, Mr. Khalil agreed, and they found themselves in a small cafe nearby, the aroma of strong coffee filling the air. "Mr. Al-Mansour," Khalil began, his voice low and controlled, "I understand your interest in Zara, but I must insist that you cease your investigation. It's for the child's own good." Rashid leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Khalil's face. "And why is that, Mr. Khalil? What are you so afraid of me discovering?" A flicker of something, fear, anger, passed across Khalil's face before he composed himself. "There are aspects of Zara's case that are sensitive, confidential. Your meddling could jeopardize her safety and well-being." "Her safety?" Rashid repeated, his suspicion growing. "Or someone else's?" Before Khalil could respond, Rashid's phone buzzed with a message from Omar. "Urgent news. Meet me ASAP." Ending the tense meeting with Khalil, Rashid hurried to meet his investigator friend. Omar was waiting in a secluded park, his usual calm demeanor replaced by evident agitation. "What have you found?" Rashid asked, his heart racing. Omar pulled out a file. "I've been digging into the truck driver who found Zahra. His name is Youssef Badr, and he's been off the grid for years. But here's the kicker. I found an old photo." He handed Rashid a grainy image. "Look at his hand." Rashid's breath caught in his throat. There, clearly visible on the man's hand, was a distinctive scar, just like the one Zara had mentioned in her fragmented memories. "There's more," Omar continued. "I've traced some unusual financial transactions linked to Mr. Khalil, large sums of money transferred from offshore accounts around the time Zara was brought to the orphanage." Rashid's mind whirled with the implications. "We need to find this Youssef Badr. He's the key to understanding what really happened that night." As they formulated a plan to locate the elusive truck driver, Rashid couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. He returned to the orphanage, determined to spend more time with Zara, hoping to unlock more of her memories. He found her in the art room, surrounded by colorful paintings. As he approached, he noticed she was working on a new piece, a swirl of dark colors with a streak of red cutting through the center. "That's beautiful, Zara," he said softly. "Can you tell me about it?" Zara looked up, her eyes distant. "I saw it in my dream last night. There was a loud noise and then everything went dark. But there was this red, like a ribbon in the wind." Rashid's heart pounded. The red scarf Amira had been wearing the night of the accident. Could this be a memory breaking through? Encouraged by this development, Rashid gently probed further. "Zara, do you remember anything else? Any faces or names?" The girl furrowed her brow in concentration. There was a song and a kind voice. She called me. Suddenly, Ms. Benali burst into the room, her face pale. Mr. Al-Mansour, I need to speak with you immediately. In the hallway, Ms. Benali's voice was urgent. Mr. Khalil was here earlier, demanding Zara's complete file. When I refused, he threatened to have me removed from my position. Something's not right, Mr. Al-Mansour. I fear for Zara's safety. Rashid's protective instincts flared. We need to move her to a safe place. Can you arrange that? Ms. Benali nodded, determination replacing fear in her eyes. I have a friend who runs a private children's retreat outside the city. We can take her there tonight. As they hastily made arrangements, Rashid received another message from Omar. Found Badr. Meeting him tomorrow. Be careful. We're not the only ones looking for him. That night, under the cover of darkness, Rashid helped Ms. Benali transport a confused but trusting Zara to the retreat. As they drove through the quiet streets of Casablanca, Rashid couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. At the retreat, a peaceful compound surrounded by olive groves, Zara seemed to relax. As Rashid tucked her into bed, she grabbed his hand. Will you stay? She asked, her voice small and vulnerable. Of course, Rashid replied, his heart swelling with emotion. As he sat by her bedside, watching her drift off to sleep, he made a silent vow to protect her, no matter what secrets the coming days might reveal. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows, Rashid prepared to meet Omar and the mysterious Youssef Badr. He knew that this encounter could finally provide the answers he'd been seeking for 5 long years. As he kissed Zara's forehead before leaving, she stirred and mumbled something in her sleep. Rashid leaned closer, his heart nearly stopping as he heard the word that escaped her lips. Baba, father. With renewed determination, Rashid set out to uncover the truth that had been hidden for far too long. Little did he know that the revelations awaiting him would shake the very foundations of his world and set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon as Rashid navigated the winding roads leading out of Casablanca. His mind raced with the implications of Zara's unconscious utterance. Baba, the Arabic word for father, echoed in his ears, filling him with a mix of hope and trepidation. He arrived at the designated meeting spot, a small, nondescript cafe on the outskirts of the city. Omar was already there, seated at a corner table with a man Rashid assumed was Youssef Badr. As Rashid approached, he couldn't help but notice the nervous energy emanating from the truck driver. His eyes darting around the room, his fingers tapping an erratic rhythm on the tabletop. Mr. Badr, Rashid began, taking a seat. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I can't express how important this is. Youssef nodded, his gaze finally settling on Rashid. I've been carrying this secret for 5 years, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's time the truth came out. Over the next hour, Youssef recounted the events of that fateful night 5 years ago. He had been driving his usual route when he came across a horrific scene, a car wreck on a secluded stretch of road. As he approached to help, he heard a child's cry. There was so much chaos, Youssef continued, his eyes distant with the memory. I found the little girl, terrified but alive, strapped in her car seat. The woman in the front, I assume her mother, she wasn't moving. I knew I had to get the child out. Rashid's heart clenched, imagining the scene. But why didn't you report it to the authorities? Youssef's expression darkened. As I was freeing the girl, another car arrived. 2 men got out. They didn't seem surprised by the wreck. One of them, a man with cold eyes, told me to hand over the child. When I refused, he threatened my family. Said they knew where I lived, where my children went to school. Did you get any names? Omar pressed. Youssef shook his head. No, but I overheard them talking. They mentioned something about a botched job and loose ends. I was terrified. I managed to slip away with the girl while they were arguing, but I knew I couldn't go to the police, so I drove for hours until I found a safe place to leave her, the orphanage. Rashid sat back, his mind reeling. The accident that had torn his family apart hadn't been an accident at all. It had been deliberate. Mr. Badr, Rashid said, his voice thick with emotion, I can't thank you enough for saving her, but I need to know. Why come forward now? Youssef met Rashid's gaze, determination evident in his eyes. Because I saw one of them again just last week. The man with the cold eyes. He was outside the orphanage. I knew then that the girl wasn't safe anymore. I couldn't stay silent any longer. As they left the cafe, Rashid's phone buzzed with a message from Ms. Benali. Urgent. Mr. Khalil showed up at the retreat. He's demanding to see Zara. What should I do? Panic surged through Rashid. We need to go now, he told Omar. Zara's in danger. They raced back towards the retreat, the scenery blurring past as Rashid pushed the car to its limits. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Fear for Zara's safety, anger at the conspiracy that had robbed him of 5 years with his daughter, and a desperate hope that he wasn't too late. As they neared the retreat, Rashid spotted a familiar black car parked haphazardly near the entrance. His heart sank. It was the same vehicle he had seen watching the orphanage. Bursting through the doors, Rashid and Omar were met with a scene of chaos. Mr. Khalil was there, engaged in a heated argument with Ms. Benali. But it was the sight of Zara huddled in a corner with tears streaming down her face that spurred Rashid into action. Get away from her, he shouted, moving swiftly to place himself between Khalil and Zara. Khalil's eyes narrowed. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Al-Mansur. This is bigger than you can imagine. I understand perfectly, Rashid retorted. I know about the accident, about the men who tried to take her. It ends now, Khalil. For a moment, tension crackled in the air. Then, with surprising speed, Khalil made a dash for the exit. Omar moved to intercept him, but Khalil managed to slip away, disappearing into a waiting car. As the sound of screeching tires faded, Rashid turned his attention to Zara. Kneeling beside her, he gently took her hands in his. You're safe now, Zara. I promise. The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and recognition. I remember you, she whispered. From before. You used to sing to me. Rashid's breath caught in his throat. That's right, Habibti, he said softly, using the endearment he had reserved for Layla. I'm your Baba. As Zara fell into his embrace, sobbing with a mixture of relief and long-buried emotions, Rashid knew that their journey was far from over. There were still many questions to be answered, dangers to face and wounds to heal, but in that moment, holding his daughter in his arms after 5 long years, Rashid felt a sense of peace wash over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The truth was finally coming to light, and with it, the promise of a future he had thought lost forever. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow through the windows of the retreat, Rashid made a silent vow. He would unravel every thread of this conspiracy, bring those responsible to justice, and finally give Zara, his Layla, the life and love she deserved. The road ahead would be difficult, but with each passing moment, the echoes of truth grew stronger, guiding them towards a future filled with hope and healing. In the days following the confrontation at the retreat, Rashid found himself navigating a complex web of emotions and responsibilities. With Zara, now confirmed to be his long-lost daughter Layla, safely by his side, he divided his time between ensuring her security and unraveling the mystery that had kept them apart for 5 long years. The reunion between father and daughter was a delicate dance of rediscovery. Zara, still adjusting to the truth of her identity, oscillated between moments of joy and confusion. Rashid, for his part, found himself overwhelmed by the smallest details. The way she wrinkled her nose when she laughed, just like Amira used to, or how she hummed softly to herself while drawing, a habit he recognized from Layla's early years. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden of Rashid's heavily guarded estate, Zara looked up from her sketchbook with a furrowed brow. "Baba," she began, the word still new on her tongue, "I keep having these dreams. There's a woman with a red scarf and she's calling my name, but it's not Zara she's calling. It's Layla." Rashid's heart clenched. "That's your mother, Habibti," he said softly. "Her name was Amira and she loved you very much. Layla is the name we gave you when you were born." Zara nodded slowly, processing this information. "I wish I could remember her better," she whispered. "We'll remember her together," Rashid promised, pulling her close. While these moments of connection brought healing, the urgency of uncovering the full truth never faded. Omar had been working tirelessly, following leads and connecting dots. His investigations had revealed a disturbing pattern of similar incidents, car accidents that weren't accidents at all, always involving wealthy or influential families. "It's like a shadow organization," Omar explained during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "They operate just beneath the surface, targeting specific individuals for reasons we haven't fully uncovered yet." Rashid leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "And Khalil, where does he fit into all this?" Omar's expression darkened. "We've traced some of his communications. It seems he was a low-level operative, tasked with keeping an eye on Zara and ensuring she remained hidden. But he's gone completely off the grid since the confrontation at the retreat." As they delved deeper into the conspiracy, Rashid found an unexpected ally in Ms. Benali. Her network within the child welfare system proved invaluable, providing access to records and connections that might otherwise have remained hidden. It was through one of these connections that they made a breakthrough. A former colleague of Amira's from her days as an investigative journalist reached out, having heard rumors of Zara's reappearance. "Amira was working on a big story before the accident," the colleague Nadia revealed during a clandestine meeting. "She never shared the details, but I know it had her spooked. She mentioned something about corrupt officials and a scheme that went all the way to the top. This revelation cast the events of 5 years ago in a new light. Had Amira uncovered something so damaging that it led to the attempt on her life? And if so, were those same forces still at work, posing a threat to Zara even now?" As Rashid grappled with these questions, he found himself facing another challenge, helping Zara adjust to her new reality. The girl was struggling to reconcile her memories as Zara with the truth of her identity as Layla. Nightmares plagued her sleep, fragments of the accident and her time in hiding bubbling to the surface. Seeking to help her process these emotions, Rashid enlisted the aid of a child psychologist specializing in trauma. Dr. Farida Amir began working with Zara, using art therapy and gentle questioning to help the girl navigate her complex feelings. During one particularly breakthrough session, Zara painted a vivid scene: a dark road, headlights approaching, and a figure with a scar on his hand reaching out. As she described the image, her words became more fluid, memories long suppressed, finally finding their way to the surface. "There was a loud noise," she said, her voice trembling, "and then Mama was telling me to be very quiet. She said we had to play a hiding game. But then the car started to spin. Dr. Shahmir gently encouraged her to continue, and with each word, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Zara remembered the kind truck driver who had rescued her, the fear she felt when strange men arrived, and the long journey that ended with her at the orphanage. As Rashid listened to his daughter's account, his resolve strengthened. He would not rest until he uncovered the full truth and ensured that those responsible were brought to justice. But even as progress was made, new threats emerged. Strange cars were spotted lurking near the estate, and Rashid received cryptic warnings urging him to drop his investigation. Rather than deter him, these attempts only fueled his determination. One evening, as Rashid tucked Zara into bed, she grabbed his hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "Baba," she whispered, "are the bad people going to come back?" Rashid's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. "I won't let anyone hurt you, Habibti," he promised. "We're going to find out the truth and then we'll be safe, together." As he kissed her forehead and turned out the light, Rashid knew that the coming days would be crucial. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but the complete picture was still shrouded in shadows. With Zara's safety and future hanging in the balance, he was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Little did he know that the biggest revelations and the greatest dangers were yet to come. As night fell over the city, the forces that had torn his family apart 5 years ago were regrouping, preparing for a final confrontation that would change everything. The warm Casablanca evening was shattered by the sharp ring of Rashid's phone. Omar's voice on the other end was urgent. "We've got a problem. Our source inside the police department just sent an alert. There's a warrant out for your arrest." Rashid's blood ran cold. "On what charges?" "Child endangerment and kidnapping," Omar replied, his tone grim. "They're claiming you illegally removed Zara from state care. This has to be the work of whoever's behind all this. They're trying to discredit you and get Zara back under their control." Rashid's mind raced. He knew he had to act fast to protect Zara and continue their investigation. "How much time do we have?" "Not much. They could be at your door any minute. You need to move now." With practiced efficiency, Rashid set their contingency plan in motion. He woke Zara gently, explaining that they needed to go on a little trip. The girl, still groggy with sleep, nodded trustingly. As they slipped out the back entrance of the estate, Rashid couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Zara had already been through so much, and now he was uprooting her again. But he knew it was necessary to keep her safe and uncover the truth. They drove through the night, eventually arriving at a secluded villa on the outskirts of Marrakesh. It belonged to an old friend of Rashid's, someone he trusted implicitly. As dawn broke, casting a golden glow over the Atlas Mountains in the distance, Rashid finally allowed himself to breathe. But their respite was short-lived. By midday, news of Rashid's alleged crimes was plastered across every major media outlet. The story painted him as a delusional businessman, so grief-stricken by the loss of his family that he had convinced himself an orphaned girl was his daughter. "This is insane," Rashid muttered, pacing the villa's living room. "We have DNA evidence proving Zara is Layla. How can they ignore that?" Ms. Benali, who had joined them in their hideout, shook her head sadly. "The official report claims the DNA test was falsified. They're saying you used your wealth and influence to manipulate the results." The weight of the conspiracy against them was becoming clearer with each passing hour. Whoever was behind this had reach into the highest levels of government and law enforcement. As Rashid grappled with their next move, he found solace in the quiet moments with Zara. Despite the chaos swirling around them, she seemed to be flourishing, her true personality emerging more each day. One afternoon, as they sat in the villa's garden, Zara looked up from her drawing with a serious expression. "Baba, I remembered something else," she said softly. "Before the accident, Mama was talking on the phone. She sounded scared, and she mentioned a name, Al-Jabbar." Rashid's heart raced. This could be the breakthrough they needed. He immediately relayed the information to Omar, who promised to dig deeper. Days turned into weeks as they remained in hiding. Rashid's legal team worked tirelessly to clear his name, while Omar and his network of contacts continued to unravel the threads of the conspiracy. Their efforts finally bore fruit when Omar uncovered a startling connection. "Al-Jabbar isn't a person," he explained during a secure video call. "It's the codename for a massive corruption scheme involving high-ranking officials, business leaders, and even some foreign interests. We're talking about billions in embezzled funds, rigged contracts, the works." The pieces were starting to fit together. Amira must have stumbled upon evidence of this scheme in her investigative work. Omar's expression was grim. Insurance. As long as they had her, they had leverage if anyone involved ever thought about coming clean. The revelation filled Rashid with a mixture of rage and determination. The scope of the conspiracy was larger than he had ever imagined, but now they had names, connections, a trail to follow. As they formulated a plan to expose the truth, Rashid knew they would be facing powerful enemies. But looking at Zara, seeing the strength and resilience in her eyes, he knew it was a fight worth having. Their chance came sooner than expected. A whistleblower within the police force, moved by the public narrative of a father searching for his daughter, reached out with crucial evidence. Internal communications proving the warrant against Rashid was based on falsified information. Armed with this new information, Rashid's legal team launched a counter-offensive. They called a press conference, presenting their evidence and challenging the authorities to explain their actions. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support for Rashid and Zara, with many calling for a full investigation into the corruption allegations. But even as public opinion shifted in their favor, Rashid knew the real battle was just beginning. The shadows were closing in, and those behind the Al-Jabbar scheme wouldn't go down without a fight. As night fell over Marrakesh, Rashid held Zara close, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. "We're going to be okay, Habibti," he whispered, as much to reassure himself as her. "The truth always finds a way." Zara nodded, her small hand gripping his tightly. "I know, Baba. We're stronger together." In that moment, despite the challenges ahead, Rashid felt a surge of hope. With Zara by his side and the support of their allies, he was ready to face whatever came next. The final confrontation was looming, and this time he was determined to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The days following the press conference were a whirlwind of activity. Public outcry over the corruption allegations forced the authorities to launch an official investigation into the Al-Jabbar scheme. Rashid, while still cautious, felt the tide beginning to turn in their favor. However, he knew better than to let his guard down. The powerful figures behind Al-Jabbar wouldn't go down without a fight, and he was certain they were planning their next move. His instincts proved correct when Omar burst into the villa one morning, his face pale with urgency. "We've got a serious problem," he said, his voice tight. "Someone leaked Zara's location to the press. There's a media frenzy building outside, and I'm worried it's not just reporters out there." Rashid's heart raced as he peered out the window. A sea of cameras and microphones had gathered at the villa's gates, but among the crowd, he spotted several individuals who didn't quite fit. Their stance too rigid, their eyes too watchful. "We need to move now," Rashid decided. "Omar, initiate Protocol Mirage. Ms. Benali, help Zara pack only the essentials." As they scrambled to prepare, Rashid knelt beside Zara, who was watching the commotion with wide, frightened eyes. "Habibti, I know this is scary, but I need you to be brave for me, okay? We're going on another little trip." Zara nodded, her small hand gripping his tightly. "I trust you, Baba," she said softly, and Rashid felt his resolve strengthen. Under the cover of chaos created by Omar's team, Rashid and Zara slipped out through a hidden passage, emerging several blocks away where a nondescript car was waiting. As they sped away from Marrakech, Rashid couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of the endgame. Their destination was a remote safe house in the Atlas Mountains, a place so off the grid that Rashid hoped it would buy them the time they needed to make their final moves. As they wound their way up narrow mountain roads, Zahra gasped in wonder at the breathtaking vistas. "It's so beautiful," she whispered, her earlier fear momentarily forgotten. Rashid smiled, grateful for this moment of peace amidst the storm. "It is, isn't it? When this is all over, we'll come back here for a proper vacation. Just you and me." Once settled in the safe house, Rashid and his team worked around the clock, compiling evidence and preparing their case against the Al-Jabbar conspirators. They were aided by a steady stream of whistleblowers, emboldened by the public scrutiny now focused on the scandal. One evening, as Rashid pored over financial records, he stumbled upon a familiar name that made his blood run cold. Ahmed Al-Sayed, his former business partner and close friend, was deeply implicated in the scheme. The betrayal stung, but it also provided a crucial piece of the puzzle. Ahmed had been with them the day of the accident, claiming he had urgent business nearby. Now Rashid realized with growing horror that Ahmed must have been the one to alert the conspirators to Amira's location. As he grappled with this revelation, Zara approached, clutching her sketchbook. "Baba, I drew something," she said hesitantly. I think it might be important." Rashid looked at the drawing and felt his breath catch. It was a detailed sketch of a man's face, a face he recognized from police reports as one of the suspected enforcers for Al-Jabbar. But it was the background details that caught his attention, a distinctive lighthouse and a stretch of coastline he knew well. "Zara, this is incredible," he breathed. "Do you remember where you saw this man?" The girl furrowed her brow in concentration. It was the day the kind man in the truck found me. We drove past this place, and I saw the man talking to someone in a fancy car. This was it, the missing link they needed. The location Zara had drawn was a private beach, known to be a meeting spot for high-level criminals. If they could prove the enforcer was there on the day of the accident, it would tie everything together. Energized by this new lead, Rashid and his team redoubled their efforts. They worked tirelessly, connecting dots, corroborating testimonies, and building an airtight case against the Al-Jabbar conspirators. But even as they made progress, the net seemed to be tightening around them. Strange cars were spotted on the mountain roads, and their secure communications were plagued by interference. Rashid knew they were running out of time. In a bold move, he decided to reach out to an old contact in the international press, someone he trusted to handle the story with the gravity it deserved. If they couldn't trust the local authorities, perhaps global attention would force action. As Rashid prepared for the interview that could change everything, he took a moment to sit with Zara, who had been showing remarkable resilience throughout their ordeal. "Habibti," he said gently, I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've been so brave, and your memories have helped us more than you can imagine." Zara smiled, a mix of emotions playing across her face. "I just want it to be over," she admitted. "I want us to be a normal family." Rashid pulled her into a tight hug, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We will be," he promised. "After tomorrow, everything will change. And no matter what happens, remember that I love you and I will always protect you." As night fell over the mountains, Rashid made his final preparations. Tomorrow's interview would expose the truth to the world, but it would also make them more vulnerable than ever. He knew the forces behind Al-Jabbar would stop at nothing to silence them. But looking at Zahra, peacefully asleep, clutching the photo of Amira he had given her, Rashid felt a steely determination settle over him. They had come too far to back down now. Whatever challenges the new day would bring, he was ready to face them head-on. As the first light of dawn broke over the mountaintops, Rashid took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. The final act was about to begin, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But with the truth on their side and the love of his daughter giving him strength, Rashid was determined to see this through to the end, no matter the cost. The morning of the interview dawned crisp and clear, the serenity of the Atlas Mountains a stark contrast to the tension thrumming through the safe house. Rashid, having barely slept, was going over his notes one last time when Omar burst in, his face ashen. "They're coming," he said breathlessly. "Multiple vehicles, heavily armed. We've got maybe 20 minutes, tops." Rashid's mind raced. They had prepared for this possibility, but the reality of it was still jarring. "Initiate protocol, Sandstorm," he ordered, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "Get Zara ready. We move in 5. As the safe house erupted into controlled chaos, Rashid knelt beside his daughter, who was watching the commotion with wide, frightened eyes. "Habibti, remember how we practiced? It's time for our big adventure." Zara nodded solemnly, her small hand gripping the backpack they had prepared for just this scenario. "I'm ready, Baba." They slipped out through a hidden tunnel, emerging on a narrow mountain path just as the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the valley. Rashid, Zara, Omar, and a small security team began their treacherous descent, hoping to reach the emergency extraction point before their pursuers caught up. As they navigated the rocky terrain, Rashid's satellite phone buzzed. It was his contact in the international press. "Mr. Al-Mansour, where are you?" "We're set up and waiting." "Change of plans," Rashid cut in, his breath coming in short gasps as they hurried down the path. "I'm sending you all our evidence now. Release it immediately. The whole world needs to know the truth about Al-Jabbar." He ended the call and nodded to Omar, who tapped a few commands into a secure tablet. In that moment, years of investigation, countless documents and testimonies from whistleblowers were released to news outlets across the globe. It was a digital bombshell that would shake the foundations of power in multiple countries. But Rashid knew that their personal battle was far from over. The sound of pursuit was growing closer, and the extraction point was still agonizingly far away. Suddenly, a burst of gunfire exploded over their heads. Zahra screamed, and Rashid scooped her into his arms, running as fast as the treacherous path would allow. Their security team returned fire, buying them precious seconds. "There!" Omar shouted, pointing to a clearing ahead where a helicopter was touching down. "We're almost there!" As they sprinted for their escape, Rashid's world narrowed to the sound of his pounding heart and the feel of Zahra's arms around his neck. They were so close. A figure stepped out from behind a boulder, blocking their path. Rashid skidded to a stop, his blood running cold as he recognized the face. It was Ahmed Al-Sayed, his former friend and business partner, now revealed as one of the key players in the Al-Jabbar scheme. "It's over, Rashid," Ahmed said, his voice cold as he leveled a gun at them. "Give me the girl and the evidence, and I'll let you walk away." Rashid instinctively tightened his hold on Zahra. "You know I can't do that, Ahmed. Why? Why did you betray us? Amira was your friend too." A flicker of emotion passed over Ahmed's face. "It was never supposed to go this far. Amira wasn't supposed to be in that car, but once it happened, I couldn't stop it. I'm sorry, old friend, but I can't let you ruin everything now." Time seemed to slow as Rashid saw Ahmed's finger tighten on the trigger. In that split second, he made a decision. He turned, shielding Zara with his body, ready to take the bullet to protect his daughter. The gunshot rang out, but the pain Rashid expected didn't come. He looked up to see Ahmed crumpling to the ground, a look of shock on his face. Behind him stood Ms. Benali, holding a smoking gun with shaking hands. "Go!" she shouted. "I'll hold them off." Rashid hesitated for a fraction of a second, but the sound of approaching vehicles spurred him into action. With a grateful nod to Ms. Benali, he sprinted the final distance to the helicopter, Zara clutched tightly in his arms. As the chopper lifted off, Rashid looked down to see Ms. Benali and Omar providing cover fire, holding back the incoming forces long enough for their escape. His heart ached knowing the sacrifices being made for their safety, but he knew that their actions would not be in vain. Once they were safely away, Rashid finally allowed himself to breathe. He looked at Zara, who was staring out the window, with a mix of fear and awe. "It's over, Habibti," he said softly. "We're safe now." Zara turned to him, her eyes brimming with tears and questions. "But what happens next, Baba? Where are we going?" Rashid pulled her close, planting a kiss on her forehead. "We're going to finish what your mother started. We're going to make sure the truth comes out and that justice is served. And then, my brave girl, we're going to start our new life together." As the helicopter soared over the Atlas Mountains, carrying them towards an uncertain but hopeful future, Rashid felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be trials, testimonies, and likely more attempts to silence them. But with the evidence now public and the world's attention focused on the Al-Jabbar scandal, he knew that the tide had finally, irrevocably turned. Holding Zara close, Rashid allowed himself to dream of the future, a future where they could be a family without fear, where the shadows of the past no longer loomed over them. It was a future worth fighting for, and he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Rashid made a silent promise to Amira and to Zahra. He would see this through to the end, no matter what it took. The final chapter of their long struggle was about to be written, and Rashid was determined to ensure it ended with justice and healing for all those who had suffered under the corrupt shadow of Al-Jabbar. The weeks following their dramatic escape from the Atlas Mountains were a whirlwind of activity. The evidence Rashid had released sent shockwaves through governments and boardrooms across the globe. The Al-Jabbar scandal dominated headlines, with new revelations emerging daily as more whistleblowers came forward, emboldened by Rashid's bravery. Rashid and Zara, now under the protection of international authorities, watched from a safe location as the empire of corruption began to crumble. High-ranking officials were arrested, business leaders faced indictments, and a web of illicit dealings that had spanned continents was finally exposed to the light of day. For Zara, these weeks were a time of healing and rediscovery. With the immediate danger past, she began to open up more about her memories, both of the accident and her time in hiding. Rashid arranged for her to work with a skilled child psychologist, helping her process the trauma and begin to reconcile her identities as both Zara and Layla. One sunny afternoon, as they sat in the garden of their temporary home, Zara looked up from her ever-present sketchbook with a serious expression. "Baba," she said softly, "I remembered something about Mama. She always told me that the truth was like the sun. It might be hidden sometimes, but it always comes out in the end." Rashid felt his heart swell with pride and love. "Your Mama was a very wise woman," he replied, pulling Zahra close, "and she would be so proud of you, Habibti. You've been so brave through all of this." As the legal proceedings against the Al-Jabbar conspirators began, Rashid found himself at the center of a media storm. He navigated the attention with grace, always keeping Zahra's well-being as his top priority. When it came time for him to testify, he spoke with clarity and conviction, laying out the full extent of the corruption and the personal cost it had exacted on his family. The trial was long and complex, with powerful forces still attempting to obstruct justice, but the tide of public opinion, coupled with the mountain of evidence, was too strong to be denied. One by one, the key players in the Al-Jabbar scheme were convicted, facing long sentences for their crimes. Throughout the proceedings, Rashid was buoyed by the support of unexpected allies. Ms. Benali, having recovered from injuries sustained during their escape, became a fierce advocate for reforming the child welfare system. Omar's expert testimony was crucial in unraveling the complex financial web of Al-Jabbar. Even some of Rashid's former business associates, realizing the extent of the corruption, came forward with additional evidence. As the last of the verdicts were read, Rashid felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Justice had been served, not just for his family, but for countless others who had suffered under the shadow of Al-Jabbar's corruption. With the legal battles behind them, Rashid and Zara could finally look to the future. They decided to honor Amira's memory by establishing a foundation in her name, dedicated to supporting investigative journalism and protecting whistleblowers. The Amira Al-Mansour Foundation would ensure that her legacy of truth-seeking would live on. On a warm spring day, 5 years to the day since the accident that had torn their family apart, Rashid and Zara stood hand in hand at Amira's gravesite. Zara placed a bouquet of her mother's favorite flowers, her eyes shining with a mix of sadness and hope. "I wish she could be here with us," Zara said softly. Rashid knelt beside her, his own eyes misting. "She is with us, Habibti. In here," he said, placing a hand over his heart, "and in everything we do to make the world a little bit better." As they turned to leave, Zara suddenly stopped, her face lighting up with a memory. "Baba, I just remembered. Mama used to say that every ending is just a new beginning in disguise. Do you think this is our new beginning?" Rashid smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "I think you're absolutely right, my clever girl. This is definitely our new beginning." Together they walked towards the car where Omar was waiting to drive them to the airport. Their new home awaited them, a fresh start in a place where Zara could grow up away from the spotlight, surrounded by love and security. As they drove through the streets of Casablanca one last time, Rashid reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The pain, the loss, the struggles, all of it had led to this moment of renewal. He looked at Zara, chattering excitedly about their new adventure, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. They had weathered the storm together, uncovered the truth, and emerged stronger for it. The road ahead was bright with possibility, and Rashid knew that whatever challenges they might face, they would face them as a family, bound not just by blood, but by the unbreakable bonds of love, trust, and shared experience. As the plane took off, carrying them towards their new life, Rashid held Zara's hand and looked out at the vast expanse of sky. The sun was rising, painting the clouds in brilliant hues of gold and pink. It was, he realized, the perfect metaphor for their journey. After the longest night, a new dawn had finally broken. The truth had indeed come out, just as Amira had always believed it would. And now with that truth came the promise of a future filled with hope, healing, and endless possibilities.